We're back. We're the men behind the mics. It's You're All Doomed, the podcast that will march its way through Jason Lives, Friday the 13th, Part 6, 13 minutes at a time. I'm recovering mental patient Greg.
And I continue to be Brian.
And this chunk of the movie begins with the Paramount Pictures logo and ends with the wheel of a car stuck in the mud.
So the movie kicks off with some storm clouds. It's nighttime. You know the drill by now. It probably tore down the valley like a son of a gun. We see some footage of woods and a lake, and it's pretty safe to assume that it's our favorite lake.
Yeah, it's a nice, moody, cold open. We get a little bit of Dies Irae in the score right off the bat, setting some darker tone for the movie. And then it cuts to a stray dog eating some roadkill, which is a little bit of cinema verite that we're not used to from these movies. That's another nice little piece of mood setting, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
But the stray dog is immediately scared off by a speeding truck.
And guess what kind of truck it is?
A UPS truck.
It's a 1965 Ford F-100 pickup truck. And there's a passenger in the truck, and he's holding what's clearly Jason's hockey mask. And this person is named Alan Hawes. Yeah.
The hockey mask is definitely Jason's. It's got the red crest over the eye holes. But interestingly, the red cheek stripes appear to be missing. It looks like they chipped away, even in some shots of Part 4, the final chapter, which was the last time we officially saw this hockey mask in the world. It wasn't as a dream sequence or anything, but yeah. So there are some cosmetic changes, but clearly we're meant to understand that this is the particular hockey mask that Jason Voorhees wore on his most recent rampage.
Yeah, and I have some questions just about how this Alan guy came into possession of the mask, because like you mentioned, last time we saw it was really at the end of Part 4. And then in Part 5, we were told that Jason was cremated. So how did the mask end up, remaining in Tommy's or Alan's possession? Did did young Tommy take it after he killed him at Part 4? We also don't know where Jason really ended up after Part 4. So it's possible that Tommy could have been hiding the mask this whole time, and it's been part of his mask collection. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, they did kind of hand wave away the idea that he was cremated, even in Part 5 when that was mentioned, because nobody who had that information witnessed it firsthand. So it was always a little bit questionable, and it's not too much of a leap to say that may have been the official story, but then he was quietly buried somewhere. But yeah, I had similar questions, because it's like, assuming that Tommy Jarvis is the one who kept it, did the cops give it to him? I mean, it would have been part of this
like a nice
insane murder investigation. Yeah, like, here's this mask of this monstrous killer that murdered your mother. And then, it's why would they have let him keep it? It's iconic in our world. But in terms of the movie, Jason only wore it for like 3 days. So unless there's a lost movie where he wore it again, I can see where maybe to the mind of a 12-year-old that, living through this horrible event, he identifies the hockey mask with, that sticks in his mind as a detail that he would hang on to. But yeah, why the police would turn it over to him, or, it's an odd thing, unless that it's a piece of movie memorabilia almost that we can't have a Friday the 13th movie without Jason's hockey mask.
Yeah, so you have to reintroduce it somehow. But,
yeah,
and I know this isn't the case, but one thing that I also wondered was, well, first of all, we've alluded to Tommy a couple of times. Tommy is also in this truck. He's the one that's driving. But I was wondering briefly if Tommy, who we know is a mask maker, maybe reconstructed one himself to be part of his collection. So this actually isn't Jason's mask. Maybe he was just going off of memory, which would explain why there were some inconsistencies with how it looked.
That's interesting.
Well, thank you for thinking it's interesting. I don't think it's true, though, because there's nothing else that kind of indicates that. But that was one thing I thought was, because as soon as I saw the mask again, I'm like, I immediately started asking questions like, well, wait, how did he get the mask? And then it popped into my head that maybe he did make it, which is not too far out of the realm of possibility. But the point is, Alan and Tommy are in this pickup, and they are in possession of Tommy's mask, or Jason's mask. Wherever they're going, Alan doesn't seem particularly happy about it. He's, asking Tommy, I don't know how you talked me into this. And he also mentions that if the institution ever finds out about this, they're going to haul their butts back in straitjackets. So now it's safe to assume that both of them have been institutionalized, which we've seen Tommy before, but now we know that Alan is probably a buddy of his from whatever hospital they're coming from.
Yeah. Clearly Tommy is on a mission to confirm that Jason is still dead, and to destroy the corpse, hoping to stop whatever hallucinations he's having from his post-traumatic stress. At one point, Tommy says Jason belongs in hell. I beg to differ, because we see what happens when
right.
when he does go to hell. So the only indication that there's anything emotionally or mentally wrong with Hawes is that he's like chewing on a straw or something as like an oral fixation. So maybe he was in this institution to help him quit smoking.
Right. We should also point out that the Tommy that we are seeing is not only a slightly more grown up version of the Tommy that we've seen before, but it's a completely different actor. So it's the third different portrayal of Tommy that we are seeing. But based on the actor's appearance, it's safe to assume that it's been a handful of years.
Another few years.
Since the events of A New Beginning.
Right. Which, I mean, one could even argue has quietly been written out of the canon anyway. They don't directly contradict anything, but they never really reference anything. We never hear about Pam or Reggie again, or Roy for that matter. So part 5 quietly lifts out of the saga to some extent, and especially because they recast the actor playing this recurring character. So
yeah, it probably makes more sense to operate under the assumption that we're just going to kind of forget that part 5 didn't exist, because the Tommy that we're seeing just in this very first scene is a complete 180 from the Tommy that we saw in A New Beginning. He's already spoken more dialogue in this scene than he did in the entire last movie. So this is a somewhat reformed and changed Tommy to some degree. And not to say that he was beyond repair based on when we last saw him, but it makes more sense that maybe we're just kind of pretending that part 5 didn't happen, and that we're just kind of making a jump from part 4 to where we see Tommy now.
Yeah, he certainly comes off as being a much more focused and driven individual. There is in the novelization of part 6 by Simon Hawke, which was one of my prized possessions, and sadly I got rid of it when my parents sold my childhood home. It was in a box of books that wound up getting donated or sold, and I wish I had hung on to that.
That is a damn shame, because I was going to ask you about that later. But.
I can try to track down a copy, but they are kind of expensive, because they were, they're collector's items for a certain subset of the population. But there was a line in that novelization kind of addressing the fact that, Tommy had at one point put on a hockey mask and threatened Pam, which we saw at the end of part 5, but that she managed to get the knife away from him and talk him down, and then his healing process continued, and that's why we see him where he is today, and he's a little more together than he was at the end of that movie.
Yeah, it's not impossible that the events of part 5 still happened in this universe, but the point is it's just a very different Tommy that we're seeing now.
So they continue on their way, and they wind up at a fairly rundown cemetery, but it is legit. It's not some like roadside shrine like we saw Pamela Voorhees being buried in. It's just kind of, it looks like it's not very well cared for, at least the section that this headstone that they approach is, and it's Jason's headstone. I kind of like the detail that there are no dates on this headstone, so they appear to either in universe perhaps just not want to commemorate his life beyond where his body now lies, but it's also a nice dodge for the cinematic timeline. We can pretend this is present day, and it doesn't give any it doesn't lock down Jason to any particular dates, or because in our world right now he'd be like 73 years old or something. So but it's obviously his grave has not been very well cared for. The headstone is pretty beat up.
Alan is carrying a couple of shovels, and again, I hate to go back to this, but for some reason he's also carrying Jason's hockey mask. So they have some plan here, and I don't know how the mask comes into play, but they felt that it was important enough to bring shovels and Jason Hockey's mask back to his grave.
We get our first hint of the slightly comedic tone of this movie. There are several laugh track moments almost, and the first one comes when they arrive at the grave, and Alan Hawes says, "Okay, let's go." And it's almost like he says it right to camera, and I expected to hear the live studio audience bust out laughing. But they begin to dig, and as they are making their way down through the dirt, we get a lot of very gothic shots of sculptures on nearby cemetery monuments, a lot of spooky angels, and we get more lightning flashes, and so yeah, they're really ramping up the gothic atmosphere of this movie.
We get kind of another laugh track moment when they dig deep enough to actually hit the coffin, and Alan's like, "All right, that's good, right? That's all you need to see. Just need to see the coffin." And Tommy's like, "Nope," and he pulls out a crowbar and he starts to pry open the coffin, and we see the decomposed, maggot-covered corpse of Jason Voorhees. He's clearly been there for a while.
Yeah, he's pretty well mummified.
So Jason is definitely dead, so we can assume that he was actually killed by young Tommy at the end of part 4, was buried shortly thereafter, and has been laying there for, X number of years until, grown-up Tommy comes back to dig him up.
Yeah, it's very clear that a lot of time has passed. He's covered in cobwebs and bugs, a lot of worms and maggots, and there's even a small skeleton, maybe of a mouse, in the coffin near his body. It's hard to see exactly what's going on with him, but it's definitely not pleasant. Seeing the remains of his tormentor triggers a memory for Tommy. We get some soundtrack flashbacks of Corey Feldman hacking Jason apart at the end of the final chapter. And this ignites Tommy's fury for vengeance. So he rips off part of an iron fence nearby and repeatedly impales Jason's chest. So we get another laugh track moment from Hawes where he looks at the camera and says, "Oh, shit."
I do like this scene because it's very reminiscent of when young Tommy was hacking away at Jason's body at the end of part 4 with the machete, and he just keeps like pummeling this body with this metal fence post. But what I also like is you get a lot of shots of the fence post going into the body, and you can tell there's just not a lot left to it. There's not a lot of substance to the body. It's almost just like a bag of leaves or something. It's just kind of going in. You kind of see the cadaver kind of collapsing, and I just thought that was a nice touch. Like he's really just like dust and bones at this point.
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, after a few strikes, the shaft of this metal fence post goes all the way through the body and gets embedded in the wood of the coffin beneath Jason's corpse. Tommy tries to pull the stake out a couple of times, but it's too embedded in the wood, so he gives up. He climbs out of the grave and in a very kind of resigned way says, "Yeah, fuck you, Jason." It's kind of a cool, I like his world-weary insult at that point. It's just he's kind of just so sick of having this creature haunting him, haunting his memories, that he's just like, "Yeah, fuck you."
Do you feel like that's his kind of admitting that he's satisfied by what he's done? Like this is closing that chapter? Or because like I almost got the sense that he was a little disappointed, like that it didn't feel as cathartic as he thought it was going to.
Oh, that's interesting. Man, maybe you're right. Maybe it is sort of a Like, this isn't as great as I was hoping it was going to
like,
be.
oh, fuck you, Jason. Like, you're still, like, I did this and you're still there. Like, you son of a bitch.
Yeah, then he kind of nonchalantly tosses the hockey mask into the grave, so it lands on top of Jason's body. So yeah, that there is a little bit of lament to that tone. Now that you mention it, that's interesting.
So whether he's, satisfied or disappointed by what he's done, he walks away to grab a can of gasoline that they brought with him. And it's at this point that a bolt of lightning comes crashing down and it strikes the metal fence post that's stuck in Jason's chest.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of payoff for the building thunderstorm, which is cool. There's kind of a neat, it's a neat effect of the electricity pouring down this pole and into Jason's body. From the light of that electricity, we get a better look at Jason's face, which is a ravaged, skeletal-looking wreck. It's hard to make out, but it kind of reminds me of the ghost from Scrooged that first comes to visit
very much right
Bill Murray.
It's definitely more of and it makes sense that it should be, but he looks more like a zombified creature now than just like a deformed figure that we've seen in previous movies. Like, this guy's been rotting for a while. There's not a lot of real structure to his face, and it's pretty gnarly.
Yeah, he's basically he's truly a corpse at this point. But probably not for long, because another bolt of lightning hits the metal post and Jason's right eye snaps open. So it has revived him somehow. I noticed that he has apparently brownish hazel-colored eyes.
Just like me. There's also kind of a special effects gaffe where Jason's supposed to be lying down in the coffin, but as we're getting that close-up of his eye, you actually see a maggot drop down, like almost like from his eyebrow down, which wouldn't happen if he was lying down, but you could tell that the shot was probably him standing up and these things were just falling down because of gravity.
That's hilarious, because I did notice that, but I didn't think it through enough to realize that's why. Nice. Tommy doesn't realize that Jason's eye is open, so he actually he climbs back down into the grave, and the metal spike has now been kind of blasted into a shard of its former self. It's much shorter than it had been originally, but he puts some gloves on and he makes the mistake of pulling the spike out. So Jason's body is no longer pinned to the wood of the coffin.
Why do you think he tried to take it out? Because he was going for a can of gasoline, so he was just going to pour the gasoline into the hole in the ground and in the coffin and presumably just set it on fire. So what was the point of jumping in and getting the pole out of his chest?
That's a really good question.
I mean, other than what eventually happens.
Right, other than plot convenience.
Right.
I mean, yeah, at first I was thinking, oh, well, maybe they don't want any evidence of vandalism, but it's like, well, they're going to have a fucking corpse bonfire. So
yeah, because I feel like the plan was they're going to burn the body, they're going to sit there and watch it for a while, maybe roast a couple of marshmallows, and then they're going to put the dirt back in the grave so there isn't evidence of that and leave, probably. I don't know. So yeah, that's why I was just wondering, like, well, wait, what are you doing? Why are you getting back into the coffin?
Why bother to do that? It's a bad move, because as Tommy climbs out of the grave, Jason springs up behind him and grabs him. He's tugging him back into the hole. But
I have a quick question for you.
Yeah.
How much shit would be in your pants right now if this happened to you?
It would fill the grave. So
you wouldn't have to replace the dirt.
Right, yeah. Jason's body would bob to the surface of the poop. Yeah, I mean that would definitely be,
because that's the exact second where Tommy was like, I've got this great idea. I'm going to dig up Jason's body and make sure that he's dead. And then in a split second, it's, oh, wait, I probably shouldn't have done this.
I've made a horrible mistake.
Yeah.
Tommy does manage to shake himself loose, and kick Jason free and scramble out of the grave. Tommy climbs out behind him, but Tommy has managed to get a hold of one of the gas cans and begun dousing Jason with gasoline, and he works to furiously to try and light a match to toss on the now gasoline-soaked Jason. But just as the match catches, the clouds open and the rain pours down from the sky, extinguishing the match.
Which I thought was pretty funny. It's just kind of, all hell's breaking loose right now. And, you think that Tommy's going to have the upper hand. He's doused the guy in gasoline. He's getting ready to light it. And then all of a sudden, here comes the rain. And it's kind of like, what?
The fates are really working against Tommy between the lightning bolt and the rain dousing this match. The universe seems to really want Jason up and around again. So Tommy's got a deck stacked against him. As Jason begins to march toward Tommy, Hawes comes from behind and smacks Jason in the head with a shovel. Unfazed, Jason whips around. We get another pretty good look at his new zombified form, and then smashes his fist directly through Hawes. He basically gets Temple of Doomed here. Hawes' body then, now freed of its heart, collapses into Jason's grave, and the lid of the coffin slams closed with leaving his one leg sticking partially out. But now there's another body in the grave. It's just not Jason.
So I did some research to see if it was possible to actually punch through someone's chest.
What kind of research?
I didn't actually go out and attempt it. I did some reading to determine whether...
Weird episode of Mythbusters here,
right. Brian. The short answer is no. At most, a punch can break bones and cause internal organ damage, but the fist is just too large to actually penetrate a chest. You would need to concentrate more energy on a smaller and harder object, which is called physics. And some martial artists will train their fingers to become incredibly strong and hard so that they can strike with their thumbs or fingers and pierce soft areas of the body like the neck, but trying to go through something as dense as the chest is just really not possible. I'm not saying that Jason didn't do this. I'm just saying that's it's unlikely.
Well, that could be, that could be evidence of maybe we're seeing a little bit of a supercharged Jason. We had some hints in earlier movies that his strength and endurance was approaching preternatural levels, but now that he's been effectively revived by magical lightning, he's now entered kind of the realm of superhuman.
Would you say that evil gets an upgrade?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, evil's on its way to an upgrade.
Like an Uber Jason of some sort?
Oh, now you're just being silly, Brian.
So R.I.P. Alan Hawes.
Yeah, he was played by veteran actor Ron Palillo, who was best known for playing Horshack on Welcome Back, Kotter, but was also the voice of Rubik the Amazing Cube in that terrible early 80s Saturday morning cartoon. He was also an illustrator and a renowned acting teacher.
In 2002, he was in Celebrity Boxing, where he was defeated by Screech from Saved by the Bell.
Rule of thumb, don't ever get into an altercation with Screech from Saved by the Bell.
That's a good plan.
Sadly, Ron Palillo died of a heart attack in 2012 at the age of 63. Reading his obituary, I learned that he was gay and had been with his partner for 41 years. Which is very touching. I am shocked to learn that there was a gay sweat hog.
So Alan's body has conveniently fallen into Jason's open coffin, so now Jason can turn his attention to Tommy. Fortunately, Tommy does the smart thing and runs toward his pickup truck and drives away, leaving Jason standing alone in the graveyard with nothing to do but to put his hockey mask back on where it belongs.
Yeah, we get a nice kind of reclamation shot of Jason triumphantly putting his old mask back on, and then we zoom in on his right eye again as this launches us into the title sequence. I'm embarrassed to admit how old I was before I realized this was a reference to the gun barrel opening of the James Bond movies. I wasn't a Bond fan as a kid. By the time I was interested in action movies, it was a lot more like martial arts based. And the Bond movies always seemed kind of silly to me. So I've since come to love them, but I knew the gun barrel sequence was a thing, but I had not internalized it enough to realize that this was a hilarious riff on that very opening. But I love that they've done this. They have this cold opening with a James Bond reference to start off a Jason movie. For the first time, we get the the official marketing logo that's on the poster as the opening titles of one of these movies. It's not a weird three-dimensional type treatment or an exploding mask or anything. It's truly the familiar font that we would see on the VHS cover or the movie poster.
And as you mentioned at the beginning, the actual title of the movie is Jason Lives, Friday the 13th, Part 6. At least that's how the order of the title is listed.
Yeah, they really wanted everyone to know up front that this was not Roy again or Tommy taking over. This was back to basics, and possibly a little too soon, having only been 2 years since the final chapter. But fair enough. Jason's back, and they want to make sure everyone knows that. We get some really excellent opening title music from Harry Manfredini. He's back for this one, and there's something about it that this is probably my favorite score of the series. It's just got a lot of nice energy to it, and it's well produced. And he introduces some outside elements into it, and it's pretty great. We have some returning members for the crew. The special effects are again done by Martin Becker, and this one is also edited by Bruce Green. He, in the interim, also edited April Fool's Day, which was the Amy Steele slasher flick that we watched a few months ago, and so he was carving a little niche for himself on some pretty cool 80s slasher movies. The director of photography is a guy named John Cranhouse, and most notably, he's the cinematographer for Kickboxer, the Jean-Claude Van Damme masterpiece. This movie is a little bit of an auteur project. It's written and directed by Tom McLaughlin. He went on to direct a movie called Date with an Angel, starring Michael E. Knight and Phoebe Cates. He did 3 episodes of Friday the 13th, the series, which is kind of an X-Files-esque spin-off that didn't feature Jason in any way, but was almost like a quest for magical artifacts show that was in syndication. He also directed 1 episode of Freddy's Nightmares, so we have an early example of cross-franchise work going on here. He later in his career directed a TV movie based on the DC Sniper from the early 2000s, and he did a dramatic version of The Staircase Murders, which is a true crime story that has become popular thanks to a Netflix documentary.
From a casting standpoint, Fern Champion is back. This is, I think, her 3rd time. She also did the casting for Final Chapter, A New Beginning, and now Jason Lives.
We come out of the opening credits sequence to a shot of Jason on the move. He is brandishing the electrocuted spike from his grave like it's a fucking Wakandan death spear. But he's on a mission. He has left the cemetery and he's charging along.
This is the first of many shots we're going to see of kind of like Jason on the move. And they're a little bizarre. Like when you first see the shot, it's not a big deal, but then you start to see them reoccurring throughout the movie and it starts to become a little distracting because they're just like these little 2 to 3 second clips of him just like angrily marching to places.
Yeah. I mean, and we'll see that happen again in future seasons, but I made note of that, and I kind of began to wonder what the purpose of those shots is. You know, it doesn't help us orient Jason geographically at all. I almost wondered if it was like to satisfy some sort of producer notes or studio notes about showing more of Jason, and they couldn't think of sequences to add, so they're just like, oh, we'll just have some shots of him walking through the woods. It makes a little more sense in this movie because there are reasons for him to be on the move, but it is a motif that they begin using a little too heavily in this series.
The one reason why I don't like it is because we're reminded too much of Jason, and I almost prefer to not know where he is or what he's up to so that when he does appear somewhere, it's a surprise rather than having all these establishing shots of being like, oh yeah, well, we know that he's been on his way to here because we've seen 6 cutaway shots of that. It has the opposite effect for me. I feel like I want to see less of Jason so that when he does appear, it's a surprise.
I agree. Yeah. It's like you don't want to see shots of the shark from Jaws swimming around Amity. You just want him to pop up at the worst possible moment. That's a good point. While Jason is on the move, Tommy has also been on the move. His truck pulls up to the Forest Green County Sheriff's Department.
And if that sign wasn't enough, there's also a bright neon sign outside the front door that says sheriff, like a barbershop sign or something.
Tommy scrambles inside and startles the sheriff, who's been lounging at his desk. He immediately launches into an explanation of what he's doing there, and we first get confirmation that it is indeed Tommy Jarvis. We confirm that his mother was killed during the events of the final chapter, and Tommy even alludes to the fact that Jason is more powerful now. So that's some evidence that Jason has indeed been supercharged by his resurrection.
For a sheriff, his name is Sheriff Garris. He's very skittish. I mean, granted, Tommy does come like barging into the room, but Sheriff Garris like jumps up and points his gun at him. And then as soon as Tommy's done explaining what's going on, he says something about, you're lucky I didn't paint the room with your brains, kid. So he's just immediately just this really super aggressive dude.
The name Garris is, of course, a slight nod to fellow horror director Mick Garris. It's the first of many horror fan allusions that Tom McLaughlin seeded into this movie. So there's a little bit of some meta humor going on here, too. We're also introduced to Deputy Rick Cologne. In a panic, Tommy goes for one of the police shotguns, hoping to grab it as a weapon to go hunt down Jason, and this does not endear him to the sheriff or Deputy Cologne, so Tommy gets his ass thrown in the clink.
After he gets thrown in, Sheriff Garris said something to Tommy, and it could have just been an expression, but it made me pause, that he tells Tommy that he's sorry about what happened to you and your folks years ago. We don't have any evidence that Jason did anything to to Tommy's father. His parents got divorced, and his dad was off doing something else, because they were even talking about Trish and Mrs. Jarvis were talking about going to visit him at some point. Mm-hmm. But the way Sheriff Garris phrases it, it's like, I'm sorry what happened to your folks, that they were both killed. But again, it could have just been an expression. Yeah,
it could have been a little bit of a different colloquialism, where folks meaning any member of your group or family unit.
Yeah.
Or possibly Sheriff Garris, had incorrect details and thought both of Tommy's parents had been killed in this event. Who knows? We learn here that the name of the town has been changed from Crystal Lake because everyone wants to forget the events of those horrible days years earlier when Jason, and presumably perhaps even Jason's mother, rampaged through the area. They've now begun calling it Forest Green.
I feel like it would be a real pain in the ass to change the name of a town. I understand why they did it. They're trying to create a different perception. I know that there's a university close to where I used to live in Chicago that actually changed their zip code to one that had less crime. So when, it wasn't actually the zip code that the school was in, but it was a neighboring one, so that when, prospective parents or whatever would research where the school was, they would pull up a relatively safer neighborhood.
Tricky.
Yeah. So I understand the motive behind it, but I would imagine it'd be such a pain in the ass.
Yeah, it speaks to the whole town really needed to be behind getting this memory purged, because, you think of all the businesses that are incorporated in Crystal Lake having to, reincorporate in Forest Green, even though it's only the name that's changing, all of the legal documentation and advertising, perhaps. There's definitely a lot of expense that must go into that, and some headaches too. So clearly people felt strongly about this if they agreed to it at the city council meeting. We then cut to a Volkswagen Bug driving on a backwoods trail. There's a woman behind the wheel and a cranky man in the passenger seat reading a map. These are the head counselors of Camp Forest Green, Darren and Lisbeth.
And they're driving a 1968 VW Beetle.
With the engine in the back.
Right.
They appear to be lost. Darren is having trouble orienting them on the map that he's looking at. So
probably because they're looking for Camp Crystal Lake on the map, but it's called Camp Forest Green.
Right there was a problem caused by this name change. Just as he makes a joke about stopping the car and screaming for help, Lisbeth screeches the car to a halt, jamming the brakes on, because Jason is standing in their path.
when I was watching this scene at home, my wife happened to walk into the room, and she walked in about 5 seconds before Jason shows up, and then she sees Jason standing in the middle of the room, and she just started cracking up. And I'm like, you're right. This is a really funny scene, because it's like, we're not expecting it, and they're just driving down the road, and all of a sudden they're like, oh shit, and there's just Jason standing in the middle of this like muddy path.
And we get some proto-Scream style referential humor here. Lisbeth says that, she's seen enough horror movies to know that a guy wearing a mask is never good news. And in fact, according to Tom McLaughlin, Kevin Williamson was a fan of this movie and kept it in mind when he wrote the screenplay for Scream. So we'll see a few more nods to that kind of self-referential horror as the movie goes on. But this is a nice little touch that people in these movies actually watch horror movies. Lisbeth puts the car in reverse. She wants to try and put some distance between them and this masked maniac standing in the road. But the tire gets stuck in the mud that's in the ditch alongside the road. So that's where the chunk ends.
So a fairly action-packed kickoff to this season.
Yeah, we've jumped right in. Only one person has died so far, but we've a lot has happened. Jason's back, and he's charged up, and
we're back,
and Tommy's back, and it's all good. Join us again next episode to see if Darren and Elizabeth manage to get their car out of the mud. But until then, you're all doomed.
You're all doomed.